Hello again and welcome to the Daily Templar Report and me, your guest presenter, Jim Dowson. How are yous all? God bless each and every one of yous. I don't have any, comment things today because I've got Mr. Griffin on. Nick Griffin is with us today. Are you there, Mr. Griffin?
I am, Jim.
Very good.
Yes. We're here. I'm ready.
Excellent, good. Well, there we go. I'm feeling slightly better than I was yesterday. Yesterday I was hanging, as we say in Scotland. I felt like a burst settee. Terrible, blinding headache, sore throat. I've just got a sore throat today. Still not great, but I'm all right. And even in my incapacitated state, I'm still double the man these lefties will ever be. So there you go. Hey! Nah, but that even that took a lot of effort, actually, to be honest. Now, let's get a wee bit of scripture before we kick the ball off you. Brother, have I taken a flushing? Or is the temperature went up in here dramatically? Is it? Wait a minute. There's a radiator here. I'm going to turn the wretched thing down. Good grief. Oh dear. Maybe me, maybe just an age thing, I don't know. Some Egypt turned it up, I don't know. Shh, we'll have Emery on us. Burning fume, we don't need to. We should all be sitting freezing. Not necessary. Because our Grand Prior in Hungary grew up in a chicken shed under the Soviets, so anybody putting heaters on and radiators is totally unnecessary. You'll be punished. Alright, so I want to read here from chapter 28 and verse 22 in Proverbs. He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not the poverty shall come upon him. Oh, a dire warning there to folk that have ambitions to be rich. Poverty shall come upon ye. And may God bless this, the public reading of his own infallible, inerrant and inspired word. Amen. Now look at that. This is one of these cheap Bibles. I'll tell you who made this. And look at it says here. Read this, Mr. Griffin. Genuine bonded leather, which means it's artificial. It's a scandal in the Holy Book as well. But this is my ordination. No. Nobody in Britain produces cheap Bibles like this. This is produced in America, sadly, by Thomas Nelson Publishers, Nashville. Somebody's at it. So there we go. Sad thing. But remember, we've got the good Bibles, so you know where to get them. You know where to get them by now anyway. Mr. Griffin, what have you got in store for us today, sir? I know there's some juicy things going on.
Well, Jim, I'm not sure there are really. I was looking, and almost everything in the British press at the moment is, of course, about lockdown, because here in England we're being subjected to some further extraordinary restrictions, the likes of which no one really around the world has seen until very recently, and the Americans are shortly going to get it when Creepy Joe gets his masky paws on everybody. But really, I think, Jim, we've said it all. Nothing's changed. The reality of the situation hasn't changed. The wrongness of what they're doing hasn't changed. The sinister motives behind it, their various degrees, they haven't changed. So I don't think it's worth going over all that yet again. But I have got one interesting story, which is, it feeds in fact, to the Templar's creation of the Purged platform, for people who get zapped off of YouTube, because earlier on today it came out that a really big victim has just fallen foul of the censorship. I don't know if you've seen this or not.
I seen a wee mention it. It's LBC's Talk Radio. Massive show. One of the biggest in Britain, if not the biggest.
It is indeed. Talk Radio, I don't know how it's been established, some years now, but basically it's filled a fairly conventionally right-wing niche left in the part of the gap left by the extraordinary left-wing bias of the BBC and the other mainstream mass media, and it's really very, very popular indeed. This isn't some little obscure station. It's not just in London, despite the fact that's part of the name of LBC, the sister company. But Talk Radio is big in Britain, and I've got here the Google shut them down amid claims that the broadcaster violated the website's community guidelines by, if not hate speech or anything like that, by airing criticism of coronavirus lockdowns.
Wow.
So not denying the fact that people have died, not saying that Boris Johnson is a criminal, though undoubtedly is, but just by airing criticism of the lockdowns. Now, for the same reason that they've just got zapped, of course, it's a further reason we can't talk about it without going over to Purged anyway. So, again, we don't need to discuss whether or not they're right in their criticisms. The fact is that they're entitled to make those criticisms. In fact, I'd say more than entitled. I'd say that any journalist worth their salt actually has a duty to look at and review critically all government decisions, actually. That's if the media is doing their job. They are there to review and criticise government decisions, not simply to back them up. So for doing what journalists are supposed to do, very unusual these days, talk radio have been zapped. Google had terminated the station's channel at 1 a.m. yesterday for this violating its community guidelines. Wow. And they haven't actually said why. In fact, they haven't even told talk radio what they've actually done wrong, other than the fact that it's over their repeated giving a platform to people who are saying the government has it wrong on the lockdown. In particular, you'll remember, I think, the Professor Sunetra Gupta, who's from Oxford University, and she's made some of the most cogent criticisms of the government's handling of this so-called crisis of anyone in Britain. She co-authored the anti-lockdown Great Barrington Declaration, and so Talk Radio had her on several times, and apparently that seems to be the reason that they've removed her. It's
obviously, this is higher up the chain. This is MI5, yeah. Secret Service, government, Whitehall. It's all that stuff, but not surprised. Yep. We've been warning people for years, and now it's all coming to pass. And the likes of Talk Radio, they're respectable right wing. They wouldn't deal with the likes of me and you. But now they've been treated the same as me and you, so they might not be as high and mighty in the future.
Well, perhaps not. I suspect that YouTube will probably back down a little bit. And they've done what they needed to do, because they'll have slapped them so hard that they won't dare mention it again. Yeah. So they'll go back to being a sort of right-wing safety valve, but they won't rock the boat. And I'm sure you're right, Jim, when you talk about the security services having a hand in it. Of course, everything all over social media. We've now got this 77th Brigade, which is a whole cohort of the British Army, whose job is not to drive tanks or kill people or dig ditches or get killed. Their job is to sit behind computers and to manipulate social media, to act as trolls, to hammer people who are saying the things that the government doesn't like, and to put fake information out there under the guise of being, because they're not going to say this tweet or this comment on Facebook is from a government department. They pretend to be Joe Blogs from Cirencester and all the rest of it. So an appalling abuse of power and money. It reminds us, I know we're going to talk in a little bit about the forthcoming book, but it reminds me in that looking at the struggle of the English in general, the English, the British, and hence also particularly the Americans, the old struggle for the liberties that they're now taking away. One of the most important tenets of the old English thrust for freedom and so on was an opposition not to the army, but to the use of a standing army or even a standing police force against our own people. And in the strands of English political thought, there was this very strong idea that the army was for use abroad, and the minute it was stationed in this country, being used in this country, it became an enemy of the liberties of our people. And for a long time, that idea has just sort of sat there unused and irrelevant and actually wrong, because if the army was ever used, it was things, if there was really serious flooding, the army some squaddies might then be pulled out of a nearby barracks to come and move sandbags. But the idea of the army interfering in civilian politics would have been absolutely unacceptable. It was the things we had revolutions about, and now it's mainstream and it's accepted. It's very dangerous.
It is, and a lot of people, very foolishly, in England, and I don't know why they think this, because they had a war raging in the UK, excuse me, for 25 years here in Ulster. And English patriots all say to me, one day the army will rise up. No, they won't. The closest I've ever came to death was not by bullets fired by Marxist Republican IRA men or crazed loyalists who'd fallen out with me. It was by British Army. people firing bullets at me. So I'm a British combatant fighting a Marxist insurgency, and they're firing bullets at me. Make no mistake about it. The army are told to shoot you down, they'll shoot you down. So, this idea that the army's going to rise up and save you, don't believe a word of it. I'm telling you right now, you're very, very misguided. Very misguided. The army's full of young kids who haven't a clue, and they'll do what they're told. And they'll maybe even believe it, or they won't believe it, but they'll still do what they're told. And that's it. So don't have any hopes for that. Some of the older guys who've served in the army now, don't get me wrong, they're a different kettle of fish. But they're not the ones with the levers on the instruments of power. So be very careful in your delusions. Now, Mr. Griffin, we've covered that. Now, the other thing, talk about that 77 Brigade who just churn out fake news. And again, it links into the forthcoming book. I watched a documentary last night on Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code. I don't think people... I mean, the amount of... I can't tell you. You probably know yourself, but in our Templar headquarters all over the world, we are tortured. Tortured by hundreds, over the years, hundreds of thousands, not thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of crackpots. All because of this boy, Dan Brown, and that crazy book, The Da Vinci Code, which is lunacy. However, there is more truth in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and that ain't a lot, than another guy who writes all the rubbish. It's Hal Lindsey, who wrote that series of stuff, Left Behind, and then there's a film with Nicolas Cage. These two guys are probably the two biggest fantasists in the planet, and I keep telling folk when they phone up either about Dan Brown or Hal Lindsey, what do you think of this? I say, look, I'll tell you what you better do. Go and read Harry Potter. It's a better read, it's more exciting, and there's probably more truth in Harry Potter than there is in either Dan Brown's writing or Hal Lindsey's writing. And by the way, Dan Brown's writing another book, another film's coming out about the Freemasons and the Knights Templar. So, I don't know. Again, we're going to have to get some kind of electronic block put in the phone that recognises anything to do with Masons and all that. Both gone. So that's what we're up to. Now, do you want to talk about a bit about... I see the big news coming out of England there. Is about Assange, Julian Assange.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was in the news yesterday that the extradition request from the USA for Assange was turned down by a judge, not on the grounds that it was legitimate journalism and so on, but on the rather odd grounds that if he was sent to American prison, would commit suicide. And therefore he shouldn't be sent to prison. So it's a little bit on the strange side, because if you think this through, as long as you can convince a judge that if they send you to prison, you're going to top yourself, they won't send you to prison.
Ludicrous.
And what sort of nonsense is this? There is no doubt that American prisons are almost uniquely unpleasant places, with a combination of this sort of partial privatisation, so it's prison for profit, and of course very large numbers of very, 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 very violent ethnic minorities. They're not nice places at all, but that actually isn't any reason not to send someone there who deserves to go to prison.
No, well, the last time I was in jail, the guys either side of me over a period of 2 or 3 weeks committed suicide. Now, I don't know if that's reflective of being next to me. Both of them topped themselves. It's ridiculous. People kill themselves all the time. Now, I'm just seeing news just in. Assange has been told he's free to return home to Australia once his legal things are over, the Australian PM says. So, welcome home, the prodigal son. But he's not the prodigal son. And I know there's some folk even in this programme right now watching us who think Assange is okay, some kind of freedom fighter. He's not okay. And I'm going to tell you, and then I'm sure, Mr. Griffin, you'll have your own views on it. Julian Assange has often said by his WikiLeaks that he never endangered anyone. Now, I've heard from the US Secret Service and so on that he's actually had several agents killed because of his leaks. I don't know about that, and I can't verify with this. But I can do this. In 2008, 2009, he leaked the BNP membership list of 15,000 good, decent British patriots. Their full names, addresses, how much money donated, where they lived, what their jobs were, and all that stuff. And I know there was people hurt. I know there was people's houses petrol bombed. I know people who lost their jobs. Policemen, prison officers, because you're not allowed to be in a right-wing party, even though it's legal, even though it's got political representation. It's not allowed in British law. So this is what Julian Assange done. Do you remember that, Mr. Griffin? You phoned me. I was in Spain at the time. And,
I remember it very well indeed. Yeah, it was absolutely monstrous. As regards Assange, I think you've discussed this before, so we needn't spend very long on him. I would say that most of what he did, his overall impact in American politics, in terms of discombobulating the American deep state, was a damn good thing. For that, I've got no quarrel with him whatsoever there. And yes, he undoubtedly endangered American soldiers who've been in Iraq shooting civilians. They shouldn't have been in Iraq. That's not their problem. They were forced to go by their orders. They shouldn't have shot unarmed civilians. But these things sort of tend to happen in nasty wars. But I've got no quarrel really with what he did as regards the American deep state. And I think he helped to destabilise that deep state, to give Donald Trump a little bit of breathing space. I'm surprised that Donald Trump actually hasn't pardoned him, because he's pardoned, among others, Jonathan Pollard, who was a traitor of an appalling level, handing American secrets to Israel. And absolutely astounding, truly, truly shocking. But anyway, Trump hasn't, but now the Aussies have. But for what Assange did in Britain against the British National Party, I'd have put him up against the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Scumbag.
Because it was absolutely wicked. And, people had their, as you say, houses firebombed, cars covered in paint stripper, people attacked, and many lost their jobs. People's children bullied at school. Absolutely outrageous.
For no reason. I mean, why did they do it?
Yeah.
But you know, at the time, I remember thinking to myself, Assange, you'll regret the day you did this, son. Because the Bible tells us, touch not the Lord's anointed. And the Lord at that particular time was pushing the BNP for particular reasons known only to himself. And when you go up against God's people or God's projects, you're going to lose every time. So I would say Assange, he's paid for it now many times over, because he's had a rough ride in the last 10 years. He's done. He's done and dusted now. He's finished. His brain's gone, his health's gone, everything. But I don't have any sympathy, because he brought horror upon 15,000 good British patriots for nothing. No reason other than his own political bias. So, good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish.
He did it, I think, to score brownie points, because he wasn't particularly well known at the time. So it was to score brownie points with The Guardian and the BBC and all the rest of it. And it really catapulted him and WikiLeaks further up the ladder. So he did it as a cynical career move.
Well,
it was a truly wicked thing
to do. Australia's having him back, so let Australia have him and they can keep him. And good luck to him. And we wish you well. Bon voyage. Don't let the door hit you in the back as you leave. And arrivederci, Mr. Assange. I don't think he'll live long, to be honest. But anyway, yeah, Mexico's offered him asylum. So
if I was Julian Assange, I wouldn't seek asylum in a country with a land border with the United States.
And full of mad drug cartels. And no, you better go back to Australia. You belong, son. Off you pop. Go there. So that's it. What else do you want to talk about, Mr. Griffin? What else have we got?
Well, Jimmy promised yesterday, did you not, that you were going to show a draft copy of the book?
Oh, yes, we did indeed. Yes.
Now, I think we may have tweaked the title between us.
This is just a working title. Yeah.
But just a working idea. So let's see it, because I haven't seen it. So I want to go.
You haven't seen it either. Oh, yes. We have to wait a wee second. The techie guy's getting it. But I think this next book's going to be much better than the first. I think it's going to be even better. Even better.
Where's your marketing skills, man?
I think so. And it'll be, it's roughly the same size.
It's going to be roughly the same length. There's a number of individual chapters which are longer than the other ones. We'll discuss in a minute. But the aim, equally, there's some which are going to be shorter. So probably, I think it'll be a couple of chapters shorter than the last one. But I would guess probably one block of 16 pages longer. That's my best guess at present, looking at what we got on the plan.
And it covers some controversial subjects as well, regarding the position of our sisters, females of the species, regarding their position in the world with politics and dominion and authority and things like that, which isn't really spoken about now unless it's some little pencil-neck shrieker who just hates women. We don't hate women, but the Bible is very clear on these positions, and I think it's been quite a brave move for us to include something like that in a book, because, you know, if you don't get it from us, where are you going to get it from? Nobody's talking about these things. There's some subjects that people don't talk about, and that's one of them.
Yes, yeah, indeed so. Well, obviously that's the extracts from John Knox's piece, commonly known as the Monstrous Regiment of Women, and there's a number of very old documents which we're putting out in this, which I think are very important. The more I've looked at them, it's quite astounding the extent to which, even before, it's probably a necessary precursor, before this appalling attack on our traditional freedoms and liberties, the left liberal elite have systematically deleted, particularly say on the internet, they systematically deleted and hidden the texts which inspired the men who went out and fought for and sacrificed and died for those liberties in the first place. So we got John Knox, we got Fox's Book of Martyrs, I've just finished today, Jim, an essay, a chapter on Algernon Sidney.
Oh, yes.
Who I hadn't even heard of Algernon Sidney, and I used, when I was a lad, I was in the Sealed Knot, refighting the battles of Cavaliers and Roundheads, this sort of stuff, and I'm a historical enthusiast. But Sidney was he fought for Parliament. He didn't want to. This is an English Civil War. He didn't want to fight. He fought for Parliament. He was wounded at the Battle of Marston Moor as a colonel, and he was a member of Parliament when they were debating putting Charles I on trial. Charles having lost the Civil War, and when Charles was sentenced to death, Sidney said, "No, this is wrong. Shouldn't do it. It's going to cause all sorts of trouble. Shouldn't do it." A couple of years later, however, seeing how the Civil War then sort of ground on, he said that actually, in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. And for that, the long and the short of it is that when Charles II came to the throne, he harboured a grudge against Sidney, and Sidney was put on trial for something he'd written, which was saying that the divine right of kings did not exist and it was wrong. Bear in mind, by this time, Charles II was supposedly, in fact, he was no longer an absolute monarch. He was a monarch tied to Parliament. But nevertheless, Charles used the words this man wrote to have him executed. And it was 100 years before the words he'd written really had their effect, because they became the key text read by all the founding fathers of the United States. An enormous influence, this man, the greatest influence of all, on the men who founded the United States, in terms of their ideas and the politics and the creation of that nation. So an immensely important man, who nevertheless in Britain, his work, zilch, gone.
Yeah, it's all gone. That's the problem.
And nobody's heard about him. And this is going to be the theme of the book, as with Deus Vult, it's a common theme really, is that in all probability, it's going to take many decades, at least 100 years of struggle to get those liberties back that are now being taken by this power-mad global kleptocracy. It's going to take decades, if not a century or so, to get them back. But this is nothing new, because Algernon Sidney fought in warfare, was tried and executed for things he wrote, and it was 100 years before, in effect, he had his belated revenge, if you like, on the British Crown and absolute monarchy by being the man who inspired the War of Independence in the United States.
No finer revenge than that, sir.
No, indeed not. They take time, but if they're not there in print, they will vanish.
I agree.
Because if you can find them on the internet just about now, another 5 years of this censorship, not only will you not find them, but the very fact you're looking for them will flag you up as an enemy of the state, and you'll get arrested simply for looking for these ancient and subversive texts. That's how important they are, and how important it is that we put them into a hard copy quality book, where many copies will be burnt, I've no doubt about it. Some copies will survive.
That's why we're spending the money on the top quality binding, top quality cover, top quality paper, so it won't go all brown and flaky in 40 years, which it does, because most books today are printed what we call book pulp, and it lasts about 40, 50 years, then it just disintegrates. We're doing it in stuff that'll last 300, 400, 500 years. So that's the reason we're doing it. And there's other good things in it, but I think we've got a picture now of the cover we can show you. This is a working title. There you go. Can you see it? I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, I can certainly see it, so I guess they can. I think the image is really cracking. As I said before, I think the actual text is going to change, but you get the general impression of what it is. At least you can't confuse the two books, because the one is white and the other
one
black.
is white, one is black, and I think this is a really important thing. Now inside that, we've also, we're covering the whole thing. We're also tackling some sacred cows, especially in America, like dispensationalism. That's the futurism rapture thing. The role of the Jesuits, the Counter-Reformation, then the role of the promotion of it by the Anglicans, the Plymouth Brethren, sadly, even the Presbyterians. And, this is going to come as a massive shock to a lot of American people because, I went to Bible college and we had a guy who was one of the top Whigs at the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights, and he was a lecturer, one of our lecturers. And I remember sitting in a class, I was the only Brit amongst everybody was American, and he started showing you the different end-time theologies that's accepted by Christianity. And he put, amillennialism, premillennialism, and postmillennialism. And the Americans were sitting just bombarded. What? Bamboozled? What do you mean? And they just assumed that the whole world of Christendom believed in pre-trib rapture. That's it. And he said, dear boys, 100 years ago, nobody had even heard of this. This is a result of door-to-door salesmen in the Midwest in the 20s, easy pay Bibles, buying a thing called the Schofield Reference Bible, which was a King James Bible, Nick, with all the notes of him in it. But he'd been a devotee of John Nelson Darby, who formed the Plymouth Brethren. And that's as much as Americans, even who do dig into it, get to. Well, we've took it right back to the bloody battlefields of Europe and the really nasty, vicious war fought between the Protestant and the Catholic churches, not just in the battlefield, but behind the scenes, theologically. And to be honest with you, everybody was as bad as each other, gouging and biting each other. It comes out from that, but nobody knows that. So we are really opening it wide up. And I'm quite sure some people are going to be shocked. They're going to have their foundations rocked. Because a lot of Americans grew up with the King James Bible, like us. But we don't have Schofield's notes in it. We don't have that. But in America, most people do. And that is why they've just assumed, because it's written on the pages of the Bible, they assume that it's something to do with the Bible, not just a fella writing his own particular fanciful ideas on the Bible. So they actually believe it's almost the same as the sacred word. So trying to unhinge people from that is not an easy job, but I believe it's absolutely vital to at least give people the evidence to make up their own mind from an informed position. And we hope nobody falls out with us, but if they fall out with us, they fall out with us. The truth will not be silenced. And go and study it for yourself for a couple of years, then come back, and if you still want to fall out with us, fine.
Absolutely so. Now, I know, Jim, that we've got a lot of our regular and most devoted listeners are very staunch Catholics. So I'd like to say that a chapter which I got in just yesterday from one of our Irish brothers, fantastic chapter, about 4,500 words, on the Mass Rocks and the Penal Code. So this is, just as we've got a chapter about the Covenanters, which is Presbyterians who were persecuted for their faith by the Anglican Church, so Protestants by Protestants. We've also got this brilliant chapter about how the Catholics of Ireland were persecuted by the Protestant Anglican Church, and persecuted on a scale, people think, well, what happens now to dissidents in Britain and America, and you get put in prison for 6 months or whatever, or you get a fine if you're in France and you say the wrong thing. If people think that's bad, they need to, and this is why, they need to listen to, or to read what happens, what the Covenanters endured, what the Catholics in Ireland endured, what people endured for their faith and for their national freedom it's really beyond belief, and that is what will be necessary again. And people have the fact that people have undergone it before. Once you understand that, it puts your own petty sufferings and problems into all perspective. And so it's, I think, absolutely vital. There's people saying, oh, we understand what this Great Reset is, and of course there's a chapter about it, and so on. We understand what it is. These people are evil. We'll all stand up. We'll overthrow them. No, it's not like that. You're going to stand up, and the first wave who stand up are going to get mown down.
Yep.
And the next wave, and the next wave. But it's only if enough people have the commitment and the faith and the knowledge to keep on confronting this thing and finding new ways to subvert it and oppose it and walk away from it and survive. If enough people do enough of these things, it will collapse. I'll tell you, Jim, and the chapter I'm working on, well, it's really the introduction chapter at present. It's made me really sort of understand this, that when you really think about this thing, it's an extraordinarily arrogant attempt by a group of very mediocre but enormously rich men to seize control of the entire world and impose a fantasy. It's an economic fantasy, it's a medical fantasy, the climate change thing, it's I suppose a geological fantasy. They're imposing a mass of fantasies and fake concepts on the world. Now, the communists did this, and it led to the death of at least 100 million people. Whenever people try to impose something based on fakery and fantasies, in the wars of religion you were talking about in Europe in the 17th century, there were several places, especially in Germany, where people went so mad that crazed communist millennials, cult leaders, seized control, and you ended up with entire cities being massacred because lunatics took over and were allowed to take over. And the lunatics are now taking over. The fact that the thing you were covering yesterday, Jim, this crazed Democrat pastor at the opening of the 117th Congress with his a man and a woman nonsense. But also, and what he didn't mention, it was in some of the same reports, Nancy Pelosi at the same thing said that they're going to change the rules by which the House works, and they're not going to be allowed to make reference to father and mother, brother and sister, he or she. They're not allowed to make reference to gender.
Nuts.
Because gender doesn't exist. It's an artificial construct. Now, when you have the most powerful people in the most powerful nation still on the planet, who are literally on another planet, you can guarantee that the things they do will not last. Quite apart from the fact of the religious aspect, they're going against God and they're going against God, they're going against nature, they're going against common sense, they're going against reality. It will not last. But whenever these things collapse, the more barking mad they were, the more damage they do. And this is the most barking mad of the lot. So it will collapse. It's not we're fighting a losing battle here. Our ideas, our truths are going to win. Perhaps not in our lifetime, but it will collapse. But the damage it does before it collapses and when it collapses is going to be truly epochal.
It's going to be an apocalypse.
It's going to be apocalyptic.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, we've run out of time. I forgot to thank a good brother, Samuelson, for his great generosity today towards the Donard Priory Chapter House in the Chapel. God bless you, Brother Samuelson. Nice to speak to you on the phone at last. God bless you, sir, and have a lovely and blessed day. Another thing I forgot, I was that busy talking to you, Mr. Griffin, and engrossed. I've got to wave this thing about. Yes. Look at this, War Mace. We've got new ones in. Get your War Maces. Roll up. Get your War Maces. You need one of these. You might bump into Nancy Pelosi or something in the dark night. So that's all I've got to say. Well, Mr. Griffin, that was a very interesting programme today. We got some different subjects. Absolutely fantastic. But just to finalise, we have to suffer this for generations, but we cannot suffer it unless we do one very important thing: have sons who will be the next generation's fighters, victims and martyrs, and then their sons and their sons and their sons. There's a great Irish song about resistance called Skibbereen, Revenge for Skibbereen. Yep. A father taking his 2-year-old boy away to America to get away from the oppression of the English. And his boy grows up and he has one ambition: to be the man who leads the band and cries, "Revenge for Skibbereen."
Skipper.
So that's what we need, children. Children are the soldiers and the hope for our future. So breed, not right now, wait till later, but you know what I mean. Breed, and breed again. We need more children. Well, Mr. Griffin, God bless you. Thank you, and Happy New Year to you, by the way.
And Happy New Year to you and everyone watching.
Yes, all the best. Well, we'll try and get you back on later on in the week or maybe next week. But thank you for taking the time to come to the Templar Report. And as usual, great job, Nick. God bless you. All the best.
Cheerio.
All right, folks, we've run out of time today. I hope you enjoyed that. Always very interesting having a Griffin on. Great talk, great interesting stuff, and stuff to tweak your minds. I hope you liked the wee preview of the book. It'll be out soon, don't worry about that. But in the meantime, we've still got these. There's a new batch of these winging their way as we speak. So if you haven't got the Deuce Vault, Reconquista of the West, the handbook to resist the Great Replacement, get it now. Okay, links below or on the thing, whatever. Get the book, and we'll get that sorted. Well, that's all from me. Tomorrow, God spares me, I shall be back with you. But until then, remember, stick close to God. You won't go far wrong. Deuce Vault!